The question hit Maria Torres like a punch to her remaining kidney. Standing at the family feud podium in her simple navy blue blouse, she felt the familiar ache, where doctors had removed part of herself to save a stranger. The studio lights seemed to mock the darkness she'd been carrying for 8 months. "What's your biggest regret?" Steve Harvey had asked, and those 4 words tore open a wound that refused to heal. Maria's hand moved instinctively to her left side, where the surgical scar still pulled tight when she moved too quickly. The silence stretched as she struggled with an answer that threatened to destroy her. It was Thursday afternoon at the Family Feud studios in Atlanta. The Torres family had traveled from Phoenix, Arizona, hoping this game show might help them laugh again. Maria's husband Carlos and their 2 children stood behind her at the family podium, watching their wife and mother wrestle with demons she'd refused to discuss for months. The game had started like any other episode. The Torres family was competing against the Richardson family from Dallas, and Steve was working his magic with the crowd. But when the question about regrets came up, something shifted in Maria's expression that made everyone in the studio hold their breath. Maria had always been the kind of woman who helped others. A nurse with gentle hands and a generous heart, she donated blood regularly, volunteered at homeless shelters, and never hesitated to help a neighbor in need. So when she'd learned about 7-year-old Emily Martinez dying of kidney failure, her decision was immediate. "It wasn't enough," Maria whispered into the microphone. Her voice was barely audible, but the words carried the weight of unbearable guilt. Steve's expression immediately changed as he recognized the depth of pain in those 3 words. The cameras captured every emotion crossing Maria's face. This wasn't just about winning money or entertaining an audience anymore. This was about a woman who had given everything she could and still felt like she'd failed. "What wasn't enough, sister?" Steve asked gently, stepping closer to the podium. He'd been hosting long enough to know when someone needed more than just a game show host. They needed someone who would listen without judgment. Maria looked out at the audience, then back at Steve. "8 months ago, I donated my kidney to a little girl named Emily Martinez," she said, her voice growing stronger but shakier. "I'd never met her, but she was dying, and I was a match." The studio fell completely silent. Even the crew members stopped what they were doing to listen to this confession that was clearly tearing Maria apart. Steve waited patiently for her to continue. "The surgery went perfectly," Maria continued. "The doctors said it was textbook, that my kidney was healthy and strong." She paused, her hand returning to her side where the scar reminded her daily of what she'd tried to do. "But her body rejected it," Maria said, and her voice cracked completely. 3 weeks later, Emily died anyway. My kidney, the piece of myself I gave to save her life, killed her instead." The words hung in the air like a death sentence. The audience gasped audibly, and several people brought their hands to their mouths in shock. Steve's face showed the full impact of what he'd just heard. A woman torturing herself for something completely beyond her control. Behind the scenes, producers were frantically making phone calls. What they didn't know was that Emily's family, her parents, grandparents, and little brother, were sitting in Section C, having come to the taping specifically hoping to meet the woman who had tried to save their daughter's life. "Maria," Steve said, setting down his cards and walking around the podium to stand directly in front of her. "Look at me, sister. You didn't kill that little girl, you tried to save her life." "But I didn't," Maria protested, tears streaming down her face. I failed her family. They trusted me to save their daughter, and I couldn't do it." The self-blame in her voice was devastating to hear. Steve placed both hands on Maria's shoulders. "Sweetheart, you gave that little girl 3 more weeks with her family than she would have had otherwise. You gave her parents hope, you gave her a fighting chance." "It wasn't enough time," Maria sobbed. "She was only 7 years old. She should have had 70 more years, not 3 more weeks." Her entire body shook with the weight of her perceived failure. What happened next would become one of the most powerful moments in television history. Steve turned to scan the audience, his eyes searching for something that would help heal this broken woman's heart. "Ladies and gentlemen," Steve announced, his voice carrying across the studio, "sometimes God puts people exactly where they need to be, exactly when they need to be there." He paused, his eyes finding a specific section of the audience. "Martinez family," Steve called out. "Would you please stand up?" The cameras swung towards Section C as a family of 5 slowly rose to their feet. Maria's legs nearly gave out as she saw Emily's parents for the first time since the hospital. "Maria," Steve said softly, "I'd like you to meet Eduardo and Rosa Martinez, Emily's parents." The studio erupted in gasps and tears as the impossible became reality. The family Maria thought she'd failed had come to thank her. Eduardo Martinez, a small man with kind eyes and work-worn hands, began walking toward the stage. Rosa followed, clutching a framed photograph of a beautiful little girl, with bright eyes and a radiant smile. Their surviving son, 10-year-old Diego, walked between them. "Miss Torres," Eduardo said as he reached the stage, his voice thick with emotion, "we've been looking for you for 8 months." Maria stared at him in disbelief, unable to understand why this family would want to see the woman who had failed their daughter. "We tried to find you through the hospital," Rosa added, "but they couldn't give us your information because of privacy laws. We never got to thank you." She held up the photograph of Emily, and Maria saw the little girl she'd tried to save for the first time. "Thank me?" Maria asked, confused and heartbroken. "I failed her. My kidney didn't work. She died because of me." The self-recrimination in her voice was painful to hear. "No," Eduardo said firmly, stepping closer to Maria. "She died because her little body had been fighting kidney disease for 3 years. But because of you, she got to see one more Christmas, one more birthday, one more month of being our little girl." Rosa opened her purse and pulled out a small, worn notebook. "Emily kept a diary during those 3 weeks," she said. "Would you like to know what she wrote about you?" Maria nodded, unable to speak through her tears. "She called you her angel," Rosa read from the diary. "She said that somewhere in the world was a woman who loved her enough to give her part of herself, even though they'd never met." The words hit Maria like a physical force. "She wrote that she wasn't scared anymore," Rosa continued, "because she knew there were people like you in the world who cared about little girls like her." The studio was completely silent except for the sound of people crying. Eduardo reached into his jacket and pulled out a small envelope. "Emily asked us to write you a letter before she died," he said. "She dictated it to us, and we've been carrying it ever since, hoping to find you." Maria's hands shook as she took the envelope. With everyone watching, she carefully opened it and unfolded a piece of paper covered in a child's careful handwriting. As she read silently, tears streamed down her face. "Would you share what she wrote?" Steve asked gently. Maria looked up at the cameras, at the audience, at Emily's family, and began to read through her tears. "Dear Angel Lady," Maria read aloud, her voice breaking on every word. "Thank you for giving me your kidney. Mommy says you didn't have to, but you did anyway because you have a good heart." She paused, overwhelmed by emotion, then continued, "I'm not scared anymore because I know God has people like you to take care of people like me. If I go to heaven, I'll tell God how good you are." The studio erupted in sobs. Grown men were crying openly. Mothers were holding their children tighter, and even the camera operators were wiping tears from their eyes while trying to keep filming. "She signed it, your friend forever, Emily," Maria finished. She looked up at Eduardo and Rosa, seeing them clearly for the first time. "She wasn't angry with me?" "Angry?" Rosa said through her tears. "Maria, you were the answer to our prayers. For 3 years, we watched our daughter slowly dying, and there was nothing we could do. Then you came along and gave her hope." "You gave us hope too," Eduardo added. "For 3 weeks, we believed she might make it, and even though she didn't, those were the most peaceful weeks we'd had in years, because we knew someone cared enough to try." Steve had stepped back to give the family space, but he was openly crying now. In 40 years of television, He had never witnessed anything like this reunion between a donor and the family of the recipient. Young Diego, Emily's brother, had been quiet throughout the exchange. But now he stepped forward and looked up at Maria with eyes that looked just like his sister's. "Emily told me to tell you something if we ever found you," he said. "What did she want you to tell me?" Maria asked, kneeling down to Diego's eye level. The boy looked at her with the seriousness that only children who have faced loss can possess. "She said to tell you that her kidney didn't work because it was too little, but your heart is so big it could save everybody." The wisdom of a 7-year-old spoken through her 10-year-old brother hit everyone in the studio like lightning. Maria pulled Diego into a hug, and soon Eduardo and Rosa had joined them. The Torres family came down from their podium to embrace the Martinez family, creating a circle of love that transcended loss and celebrated the courage it takes to hope. Behind the scenes, the production team had abandoned any thought of continuing the game. This moment was bigger than television, bigger than entertainment, bigger than anything they had ever captured on film. They just kept the cameras rolling and let healing happen. "Maria," Steve said, his voice full of reverence. "Do you understand now? You didn't fail Emily. You loved her. You loved a little girl you'd never met enough to give her part of yourself. That's not failure, that's heroism." Eduardo handed Maria another item from his pocket. Emily's hospital bracelet from her final stay. "She wanted you to have this," he said. "She wore it every day after the surgery. She said it made her feel connected to her angel." Maria held the tiny bracelet in her gentle hands. It was so small, so fragile, just like the little girl who had worn it. For the first time in 8 months, she began to understand that her gift hadn't been wasted. "There's something else," Rosa said quietly. "Emily's wish was to help other kids like her. We started a foundation in her name, and we want you to be part of it. We want to help other families find kidney donors." The Emily Martinez Foundation had already helped 3 children find donors in the 8 months since her death. Emily's legacy was living on through other children who would get the chance she didn't have. Maria's failed kidney had somehow planted seeds for future miracles. As the cameras finally stopped rolling, the 2 families didn't separate. They exchanged phone numbers, made plans for dinner, and began building a relationship that would honor Emily's memory. Maria's regret was transforming into purpose. 6 months later, Maria became the foundation's spokesperson, sharing her story at hospitals and donor drives across the country. Her willingness to be vulnerable about her perceived failure actually encouraged more people to become donors, because they saw that the outcome wasn't what mattered. The courage to try was everything. The episode aired on the anniversary of Emily's death, and it became the most powerful Family Feud episode ever broadcast. The Emily Martinez Foundation received thousands of donations and inquiries from potential donors. Emily's 3 weeks of hope had multiplied into years of hope for other children. Maria never stopped carrying Emily's hospital bracelet in her purse. It became her reminder that love isn't measured by outcomes, but by the willingness to sacrifice for someone else. Her scar no longer felt like a mark of failure. It had become a badge of honor. Today, 7 children are alive because of organs donated through the Emily Martinez Foundation. Each transplant is dedicated to Emily's memory and to Maria's courage in sharing her story. Her failed kidney had somehow generated dozens of successful transplants. The letter Emily dictated to her parents hangs framed in Maria's nursing station, next to pictures of all the children who have received life-saving transplants through the foundation. Every morning, she reads Emily's words and remembers that sometimes the greatest gifts come disguised as failures, because some regrets aren't really regrets at all. They're just love stories that haven't reached their conclusion yet. Maria Torres thought she had failed Emily Martinez, but Emily knew better. She knew that real angels don't always save the day. Sometimes they just show up and love as hard as they can. The miracle that happened on that Thursday afternoon in Atlanta reminds us that heroism isn't about succeeding, it's about trying. Maria's kidney may not have saved Emily's life, but her love saved her soul, and her gratitude saved hers. That's not failure, that's how miracles really work.